Hey guys, tonight we are diving deep into the crackling, supercharged world of Greek mythology, but with a sleepy twist. We're going to explore why Zeus's famous thunderbolts were so much more than just divine superweapons. Picture this, you're standing on a cloud, a very unstable early days sort of cloud, mind you, and below you, the cosmos is basically a construction site run by beings with serious anger management issues. Mountains are being tossed around like pebbles, the seas are boiling, and the air itself hums with raw, untamed power. Honestly, if you were dropped into the middle of the Titanomachy, the epic war between the Titans and the soon-to-be Olympians, you probably wouldn't survive this, not even for a nanosecond. You'd be cosmic dust before you could say, "Oh, look, a disgruntled primordial deity." So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's a small click for you, but it genuinely helps these sleepy stories find more ears. And while you're at it, why not drop your location and local time in the comments? It's always fascinating to see where everyone is drifting off from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself bearing witness to a universe still very much in the making. A time of cosmic upheaval where the old guard, the mighty Titans led by Cronus, are locked in a cataclysmic struggle against a younger generation of gods, Zeus and his siblings, for control of everything. This isn't a polite disagreement settled over ambrosia and nectar. This is the Titanomachy, a war that raged for 10 long, earth-shattering years. The very fabric of reality seems to groan under the strain. Zeus, even though he's destined for greatness, isn't all-powerful just yet. He needs an edge, a game-changer, something that can decisively tip the scales against his formidable, and frankly, rather large, Titan relatives. Your attention is drawn to the rumbling depths of Tartarus, the deepest, darkest pit of the underworld. A place that makes your average spooky basement look like a holiday resort. Down there, imprisoned long ago by their paranoid father Uranus, and later by Cronus, who clearly didn't learn from his dad's mistakes about locking up powerful relatives, are three beings of immense primal power, the Elder Cyclopes. These aren't just any one-eyed giants. These are Brontes, the Thunderer, Steropes, the Flasher of Lightning, and Arges, the Bright One or Shiner. Their very names evoke the raw elements of a storm. Zeus, displaying a canniness that would become his hallmark along with a questionable approach to romantic relationships. But we'll mostly sidestep that for sleepy time, realizes these chaps could be rather useful. So he descends, or perhaps sends a very brave messenger pigeon and frees them from their gloomy prison. Imagine their gratitude. After eons spent in the Stygian darkness, feeling the oppressive weight of Tartarus above them, they are brought blinking into, well, probably still a fairly gloomy and chaotic battlefield, but at least it has better ventilation. They owe Zeus big time. And the Cyclopes are master craftsmen, divine smiths whose skills are unparalleled. They set to work immediately, not out of obligation alone, but perhaps with a fierce joy at being able to unleash their creative and destructive energies once more. Their forge isn't some quaint village blacksmith shop. It's a cavernous, volcanic space, perhaps deep within Mount Etna, as later myths would suggest, or some other, even more primordial, fire-belching mountain. The air shimmers with heat. The clang of colossal hammers on anvils echoes through the cosmos, and sparks fly like miniature comets. You can almost smell the metallic tang in the ozone. The neighbors, if there were any, would be filing noise complaints with Gaia herself. You watch as Brontes, Steropes, and Arges gather the very essence of the storm. They draw down raw lightning from the chaotic skies. They scoop up solidified thunder. They harness the untamed fires from the Earth's belly. These aren't just lumps of metal they're shaping. These are concentrated bursts of cosmic power, perfectly balanced, terrifyingly potent. A mainstream historical fact here is that Hesiod's Theogony an epic poem from around the 7th or 8th century BCE, provides one of our earliest and most detailed accounts of the Titanomachy and the Cyclopes forging these thunderbolts for Zeus, along with Poseidon's trident and Hades' helm of invisibility. These gifts were crucial to the Olympians' victory. The first thunderbolts they present to Zeus are more than just weapons. They are symbols of this new alliance, instruments of a dawning order. They are physical manifestations of the power to command the skies, a power that previously had no single focused wielder. Zeus, holding this crackling, incandescent spear of light for the first time, must have felt an incredible surge, not just of power, but of destiny. It's like going from a slingshot to a laser cannon in the cosmic arms race. One quirky, often overlooked tidbit is that the very names of these elder Cyclopes, Brontes Thunder, Steropes, Lightning Shock's Flasher, and Arge's bright eye-class Vivid Flash, so perfectly describe the components and effects of a thunderstorm. It makes you wonder if, in the earliest iterations of these stories, the Cyclopes weren't just seen as smiths who made thunderbolts, but perhaps as minor storm deities themselves, personifications of these natural phenomena, later demoted to divine artisans. Historians still argue whether the figures of the Cyclopes in these foundational myths were originally nature deities embodying the raw, untamed power of the storm, or if they were always conceptualized primarily as master craftsmen, albeit of a divine and monstrous sort. As Zeus unleashes these first bolts in the war against the Titans, the effect is devastating. Mountains, once hurled by the Titans with impunity, are now shattered by blasts of celestial fire. Titans who had seemed invulnerable now recoil in pain and terror. The thunderbolt isn't just causing damage, it's inspiring awe and fear, breaking the morale of Zeus's enemies. It's a psychological weapon as much as a physical one. It announces that a new authority is rising, one capable of wielding the very fury of the heavens. This forging of primordial power, this gift from the grateful Cyclops, is the critical first step in establishing Zeus's dominion and understanding why his thunderbolt would always be far more than just a handy way to smite annoying mortals or rebellious giants. It was, from its very inception, a tool of cosmic reordering, a scepter of light heralding a new age, and you, an unseen observer, are there to witness its fiery birth? So, you've witnessed the fiery birth of Zeus's thunderbolts, those devastating weapons forged by the grateful Cyclopes, Brontes, Steropes, and Arges, deep within their primordial smithy. As we saw in Section 1, you've felt the cosmic shockwaves as these first bolts of concentrated power helped Zeus and his Olympian siblings finally overthrow the mighty Titans, ending that decade-long universe-shaking war, the Titanomachy. The dust is beginning to settle, or as much as cosmic dust ever really settles. The defeated Titans are, for the most part, safely locked away in the gloomy depths of Tartarus, probably grumbling about how much better things were in their day, and how kids these days have no respect. Zeus, along with his brothers Poseidon and Hades, has drawn lots for the division of the cosmos. Hades gets the gloomy, mineral-rich underworld. Poseidon, the vast, salty, and occasionally grumpy seas. And Zeus, well, Zeus gets the sky, the highest, most expansive domain of all. He is now the undisputed king of the gods, enthroned on Mount Olympus. But a king needs more than just a fancy throne and a good view. A king needs symbols of his authority, tangible representations of his power and his right to rule. And for Zeus, that ultimate symbol, the divine equivalent of a royal scepter, a crown, and a presidential motorcade all rolled into one, becomes the thunderbolt. Remember those first terrifyingly powerful bolts? They weren't just put into storage once the war was won, only to be brought out for the occasional smiting. No, the thunderbolt becomes an almost permanent extension of Zeus himself, the very emblem of his sovereignty. You see him now, not necessarily hurling it in anger, but often just holding it. In countless ancient depictions, in sculptures and on pottery, Zeus is shown with the thunderbolt grasped firmly in his hand, sometimes held aloft, sometimes resting by his side, but always prominent. It's not merely a weapon at rest, it's a statement. It says, I am the one in charge here. Any questions? No good. This is much like how, in ancient Greek society, a little historical fact for you, the skeptron, a staff or scepter, was carried by kings, judges, and heralds as a clear visual marker of their authority and their right to speak or command. Zeus's thunderbolt functions in a very similar, though obviously much more electrifying, capacity. It's his divine credential, his ultimate non-negotiable badge of office. Its power as a symbol of kingship stems from several intertwined factors. Firstly, its origin and uniqueness, which we touched upon with the Cyclops. It wasn't a weapon he found lying around or bought at a divine surplus store. It was crafted specifically for him, by beings of immense power, as a gift that enabled his victory. This gives it an almost sacred, bespoke quality. It's his and his alone, a divine prerogative. If another god tried to invent their own thunderbolt, it'd be like someone showing up to a royal coronation with a plastic Burger King crown, just not the same. Secondly, there's its sheer, unadulterated power. Even when not actively being used, the thunderbolt radiates an aura of immense destructive potential. Every other god, every nymph, satyr, and mortal knows what it can do. They've heard the stories, or perhaps even witnessed its effects during the Titanomachy or subsequent altercations. This ever-present threat, the knowledge that Zeus can unleash devastating force at any moment, is a powerful deterrent. It keeps the more ambitious minor deities in line and ensures that Olympian council meetings generally proceed without too much celestial furniture being thrown. The thunderbolt is the ultimate "because I said so" argument. Furthermore, as ruler of the sky, the thunderbolt is the most natural and fitting emblem of his domain. Storms, lightning, thunder. These are the most dramatic and awe-inspiring phenomena of the heavens. By wielding the thunderbolt, Zeus isn't just controlling a weapon. He's demonstrating his mastery over the sky itself, his ability to command its most potent forces. When the skies darken and lightning splits the clouds, it's not just bad weather, it's Zeus making his presence known. A visible and audible reminder of who's boss. It's interesting to note that Zeus doesn't always need to be actively zapping things to maintain his authority. The thunderbolt can be a symbol at rest. Its mere presence, perhaps leaning against his throne or held loosely in his hand, is enough. The other Olympians, even powerful figures like Hera, Poseidon, or Apollo, recognize its significance. They might grumble. They might plot. Hera, in particular, was quite good at plotting, but they rarely mount a direct open challenge to Zeus's authority when the thunderbolt is in play. Historians still argue whether Zeus's kingship and the relative stability of the Olympian pantheon were primarily maintained due to his inherent personal might, overwhelmingly symbolized by the thunderbolt, or if it was more a result of his political shrewdness, his ability to forge alliances remembering his initial pact with the Cyclops and Hecaton Chiras, and the perceived legitimacy of his reign after overthrowing the often harsh and chaotic rule of the Titans. One quirky little detail you might ponder is how the thunderbolt was treated when not in Zeus's immediate grasp. Was there a special velvet-lined lightning-proof case for it on Mount Olympus did Hephaestus? The smith god performed regular maintenance checks. The myths don't usually go into such mundane details, but it's fun to imagine the practicalities. Perhaps it had its own dedicated pedestal, and younger deities were strictly warned. Do not touch the pointy, glowy thing. Seriously, not even for a dare. The reverence for the object itself, not just for Zeus, would have underscored its role as a sacrosanct symbol of power. So, as Zeus presides over the affairs of gods and mortals, that fiery gift from the Cyclops has transformed. It's no longer just the tide-turner of a desperate war. It has become the luminous scepter of the king, the ultimate visual shorthand for divine authority, order, and the often fearsome majesty of the ruler of Olympus. Every flash you see in a storm, in this mythical context, isn't just electricity. It's a glint from the scepter of the cosmos. So, you've seen Zeus firmly established as the king of the gods, his authority largely undisputed, in no small part thanks to that impressive crackling thunderbolt he's usually got casually slung over his shoulder or held like the universe's most intimidating remote control, as we pictured in Section 2. It's a potent symbol of his reign, a constant reminder of the power that quelled the Titanomachy and brought a semblance of order to the cosmos. But this thunderbolt isn't just for show, like a novelty oversized scepter for Olympian parades. Oh no. One of its primary and perhaps most talked about functions is as an instrument of divine justice, a tool for enforcing cosmic law and delivering some rather emphatic rebukes to anyone, god or mortal, who steps too far out of line. You have to understand that with Zeus's reign came the concept of a certain divine order, often personified by goddesses like Themis, divine law and custom, and her daughter Dike, justice and moral order. Zeus himself is often seen as the ultimate upholder of these principles. It's not always a perfect system, and Zeus himself, let's be honest, has his own, shall we say, ethically flexible moments, especially in his romantic pursuits. But when it comes to certain fundamental cosmic rules, like honoring oaths, respecting the proper boundaries between mortals and gods, or not trying to overthrow the current management, Zeus, with his thunderbolt, is the ultimate enforcer. His legal code was pretty straightforward, often boiling down to, "Don't make me come down there." And if you did, the follow-up was frequently a lot of sizzling. One of the biggest no-nos in ancient Greek thinking was hubris, that overweening pride or arrogance where mortals forget their place and start acting like they're equal to, or even better than, the gods. This rarely ended well. Consider the case of Salmoneus, a king who got it into his head that he could replicate Zeus's thunder and lightning. He'd drive his chariot around, dragging bronze kettles and dried hides to mimic thunder, and waving torches to simulate lightning, demanding that his people worship him as Zeus. You can imagine the real Zeus up on Olympus, looking down at this amateur dramatics display, probably stroking his beard and thinking, "Oh, honey, no." The response was predictably a genuine, non-simulated thunderbolt that crisped Salmoneus and his entire city. It was a rather emphatic way of saying, "Impressive effort. 0-10 for originality. And you're fired? Literally?" Then there's the tragic tale of Phaethon, son of the sun, god Helios. Phaethon, in a fit of youthful insecurity, pestered his dad into letting him drive the sun chariot for a day. Bad idea. He loses control, veers too close to the earth, scorching it, then too far away, freezing it. The whole planet is basically having a very bad day. Zeus, seeing the cosmic order on the brink of collapse, has to intervene. With a well-aimed thunderbolt, he strikes Phaethon from the chariot, sending him plunging to his death, but saving the world from becoming either a giant desert or a cosmic ice cube. It's a harsh punishment for a joyride gone wrong, but from Zeus's perspective, it's about restoring balance. The thunderbolt also served to keep the divine community itself in check. While major rebellions like the Titanomachy were dealt with, even lesser transgressions or challenges among the gods could meet with a stern, lightning-infused reminder of who was in charge. And when it came to enforcing oaths, especially those sworn by the fearsome river Styx, Zeus's thunderbolt was the ultimate guarantor. Perjury among the gods was a serious offense, and the consequences, often involving a long, coma-like state, were not to be trifled with. A key historical fact is that the sanctity of oaths was incredibly important in ancient Greek society, both in myth and in daily life. For the gods to swear by the Styx, with Zeus and his thunderbolt as the ultimate backstop, underscored the absolute gravity of such commitments. Sometimes, the thunderbolt wasn't just about punishing individuals, but about rectifying a disruption to the natural order. Asclepius, the brilliant god of medicine, became so skilled that he started raising people from the dead. This, understandably, caused a bit of a backlog in his uncle Hades' domain, and generally mucked up the established cycle of life and death. Zeus, though perhaps admiring Asclepius' skill, couldn't let this stand. A thunderbolt put an end to Asclepius' overly enthusiastic healing, though he was later deified. It's a complex message talent is great, but don't mess with the fundamental operating system of the universe unless you want to deal with the IT guy from Olympus. Scholars of mythology still debate whether Zeus's use of the thunderbolt to punish mortals and enforce his will primarily reflected a coherent moral framework within Greek religion, emphasizing concepts like dike and cosmic balance, or if these stories served more as cautionary tales, narrative devices to illustrate the awesome power of the gods and the inherent dangers of human presumption, and challenging the divine hierarchy. It's likely a bit of both, with the balance shifting depending on the specific myth and the era in which it was told. A quirky tidbit related to divine justice and lightning is the ancient Greek practice regarding places struck by a thunderbolt. Such a spot, called an Enelasion or Hieron Karavnian Shrine of the Thunderbolt, was often considered sacred or sometimes accursed and taboo. It was cordoned off and it was forbidden to enter or disturb it. It was as if the strike itself, a direct touch from Zeus, had permanently altered the nature of that piece of ground, making it a place apart, a visible scar of divine interaction with the mortal world. This wasn't always about punishment of a person, but a marking of a place by a profound event. So, as you drift and dream, you see that crackling bolt, gifted by the Cyclopes and symbolizing Zeus's kingship, is also his chief instrument of justice. It's the celestial gavel, the divine enforcer, ensuring that the rules of the cosmos, however harsh or alien they might sometimes seem to mortal understanding, are generally upheld. It's a reminder that actions have consequences, especially when those actions annoy the fellow holding the lightning. You've seen Zeus wielding his thunderbolt as the ultimate symbol of his kingship Section 2, and as a rather emphatic tool for dishing out divine justice, smiting the hubristic and restoring cosmic order with a well-aimed blast. Section 3. When that lightning struck, as we noted, the spot itself often became an Enelation, a sacred or taboo place, marked forever by that direct, fiery touch from the king of the gods. It was a clear do not disturb sign from on high. But tonight, let's lean back and ponder a slightly less common, and perhaps more subtly creative, aspect of these celestial discharges. What if, just sometimes, Zeus's thunderbolt didn't just destroy or consecrate by terrifying power, but actually shaped things? What if that raw, primordial energy, first packed into those bolts by the Cyclopes as we saw in Section 1, occasionally resulted in something new, something unexpected, being born from the earth itself? It's a quieter side to the Thunderbolt story, not as flashy as blasting a titan or a presumptuous mortal into smithereens. But you might find, if you sift through the more obscure corners of local legends and place myths, rare tales where a lightning strike from Zeus was credited with, say, bringing forth a sacred spring. Imagine a parched hillside, baked brown under the Mediterranean sun. Zeus, perhaps in a moment of contemplation or even accidental landscaping, like who knows, divine urban planning can be mysterious. Let's fly a bolt. Instead of just leaving a smoking crater, the earth trembles, splits, and from that fissure, clear, cool water begins to gush forth, creating a spring where none existed before. Such a place, born directly from the sky god's power manifested as water, a vital element often associated with him through rain and storms, would instantly become sacred. Nymphs might take up residence, local people would come to draw water, offer prayers, and perhaps build a small shrine. The thunderbolt, in this instance, isn't a weapon of punishment, but an accidental tool of creation, a divine catalyst for life. You wanted a water feature for your arid landscape Zeus sometimes provides. Just try not to be standing on the exact spot during the installation process. This idea of the thunderbolt transforming the landscape extends beyond just springs. You might hear stories where a massive bolt splits a great rock, cleaving it in two and creating a new pathway through a previously impassable bit of terrain. Or perhaps it strikes an ancient, gnarled olive tree, not destroying it entirely, but charring it in such a unique way that the tree itself becomes a landmark, a focal point for local lore, its strange shape forever attributed to that divine touch. These aren't grand acts of ordering the cosmos like the Titanomachy, but smaller, more intimate interactions between the divine and the terrestrial, where the power of the sky god leaves a lasting physical imprint on the land. It's Zeus as an accidental sculptor, his chisel a flash of lightning. A mainstream historical fact that resonates with this is that many ancient Greek sanctuaries and cult sites were indeed situated near distinctive or unusual natural features. Sacred groves, deep caves, prominent peaks, and especially springs. These places often felt inherently numinous, touched by the divine. While not every such site would have a lightning origin story, it's easy to see how a dramatic event like a major lightning strike, which visibly altered a location or revealed a hidden water source, could lead to that spot being revered and incorporated into religious practice. Why would these more creative or transformative tales exist alongside the more common narratives of destruction? Perhaps it's a way of acknowledging the multifaceted nature of Zeus's power. As the sky god, he's not just about the fury of the storm, he's also about the life-giving rain that follows. The thunderbolt, his ultimate emblem, could then also subtly reflect this duality, capable of terrifying destruction. Yes, but also, in rarer moments, of unlocking the Earth's potential. It adds a layer of complexity to his divine authority, showing it's not based solely on the ability to obliterate. Archaeologists and mythographers still debate whether the association of certain natural springs, peculiar rock formations, or unusually scarred trees with divine lightning strikes was primarily a way for ancient peoples to explain striking or unusual geology post hoc, attributing natural wonders to supernatural agency, or if such sites genuinely attracted cult activity and mythological explanations because of an actual, memorable lightning event that was witnessed and passed down in local memory. It's a classic chicken or egg scenario of myth-making. Did the story create the sacred site, or did the struck site inspire the story? One quirky, and rather specific, kind of tidbit you might encounter in this vein is the belief in some ancient cultures that certain plants or fungi that appeared to thrive in areas recently struck by lightning possess special medicinal or magical properties. The fulgurite, a glassy tube formed when lightning strikes sand, might have been seen as a potent, if bizarre, artifact. While direct Greek examples of lightning-harvested herbs might be elusive in mainstream texts, the general principle of a divinely touched spot imbuing its surroundings with special qualities is quite widespread in folklore. Imagine an ancient herbalist cautiously approaching a lightning-blasted oak, hoping to find a particularly potent sprig of mistletoe, thinking, well, Zeus zapped it, so it must be extra good for something. So, while the thunderbolt is undeniably Zeus's enforcer, his symbol of ultimate power and often his tool for rather dramatic conflict resolution, you can now also picture these fainter, more nuanced stories. You can see the landscape itself as a canvas, occasionally, and perhaps unintentionally, recontoured by that celestial fire. It's a reminder that even the most fearsome power can have unexpected, even generative consequences, etching not just fear but also wonder and new life into the ancient world. You've now glimpsed the more subtle, perhaps even unexpectedly creative side of Zeus's thunderbolt, how that immense power we saw forged in Section 1 could, on rare occasions, shape the land itself, maybe even coaxing forth a sacred spring as we mused in Section 4. It wasn't always about the dramatic smiting of a hubristic king, a favorite pastime we covered in Section 3. But beyond these direct physical impacts, destructive, punitive, or surprisingly generative, every single flash of lightning, every distant rumble or deafening crack of thunder, was considered by the ancient Greeks to be something more a potential message, a celestial communique, an omen sent directly from Zeus. the king of the gods. Our theme from Section 2. This wasn't just random atmospheric discharge you could ignore while you got on with your day. This was Zeus talking, and you'd better try to figure out what he was saying. Imagine yourself an ancient Greek farmer, a soldier about to go into battle, or a politician contemplating a major decision. The sky darkens, a storm brews. When that first jagged spear of lightning splits the clouds, it's not just a cue to seek shelter, it's a moment pregnant with meaning. Is Zeus angry? Is he offering approval? Is this a warning, a promise, a cosmic thumbs up or divine facepalm? The interpretation of these celestial signs became a crucial, if often anxiety-inducing, part of life. Trying to understand a lightning omen back then was probably a bit like trying to decipher a particularly cryptic text message from your boss. You know it's important, but the exact meaning can be maddeningly elusive. This practice of interpreting divine signs, known broadly as divination, was deeply ingrained in Greek culture. A significant historical fact is that various forms of divination, including Koronoscopia divination, specifically by observing thunder and lightning and augury, interpreting the flight and cries of birds, often in conjunction with lightning or other celestial phenomena, were serious and often institutionalized practices. Major decisions of state, the timing of military campaigns, the founding of new colonies, even important personal choices, could be heavily influenced by the reading of such omens. You didn't just consult your strategic advisors, you consulted your seer, the fellow who was supposedly on better speaking terms with the divine powers. So, how did you go about reading a thunderbolt? It wasn't a simple one-size-fits-all interpretation. Several factors would be meticulously considered. The direction of the lightning was paramount. For the Greeks, lightning seen on the right-hand side was generally considered a favorable omen, a sign of Zeus's approval or encouragement. If you were about to launch an attack and lightning flashed to your right, you might take it as a green light from the big guy himself. Lightning on the left, however, was often seen as inauspicious, a warning, a sign of divine displeasure. This could halt armies in their tracks, postpone important sacrifices, or send shivers of apprehension through an entire city. But it wasn't just left versus right. The context mattered enormously. What was happening when the lightning struck? Who or what was hit, or nearly hit? If lightning struck the altar during a sacrifice, it could have very specific implications for whether the offering was accepted or rejected. The time of day, the season, even the perceived color or type of lightning, was it a single, clean bolt, or a more diffuse, smoky discharge, could all be fed into the divinatory calculus. And then there were accompanying signs, the flight patterns of birds immediately before or after the strike, the nature of the thunder that followed. It was a complex, multi-layered system of interpretation, requiring specialized knowledge and, undoubtedly, a good deal of inspired guesswork. The individuals tasked with deciphering these messages, the seers, priests, or augurs, held considerable sway. Their pronouncements could influence the course of history. Of course, this also opened the door to potential manipulation. Classicists and historians of religion still ponder the extent to which belief in these specific lightning omens genuinely dictated major political or military decisions, versus how often such interpretations might have been strategically employed by canny leaders or persuasive seers to support pre-existing intentions or political agendas. Oh, look, lightning on the right. Just as I was suggesting we invade Lydia clearly, Zeus agrees with my brilliant plan. One quirky tidbit is the level of detail some ancient divinatory systems went into regarding lightning. For instance, some traditions held that lightning striking an oak tree sacred to Zeus carried a particularly potent message, perhaps different from a strike on a laurel sacred to Apollo or an olive tree. There were even beliefs about the specific implications if the lightning bolt appeared to come from a clear sky, a diosemeion or sign from Zeus of a most unambiguous and often startling kind. Imagine the collective gasp if a bolt just appeared out of nowhere on a sunny afternoon. You'd know Zeus really wanted to make a point. this constant scanning of the skies for messages. This belief that the king of the gods was actively communicating his will through the most dramatic of natural displays added another layer to the awe and fear surrounding thunderstorms. It wasn't just the raw power, the potential for destruction, or even the occasional creative reshaping of the land that captivated the ancient Greek mind. It was the sense of an active intelligence behind it, a divine mind attempting to guide, warn, or affirm. Every flash was a word, every thunderclap a sentence in a cosmic dialogue, and you, the humble mortal, were left to puzzle out the grammar of the gods? It's a far cry from just checking the weather app on your phone. Isn't it? You've now seen how Zeus, the newly crowned king of the gods, uses the thunderbolt not just as a symbol of his authority. Section 2, or a tool for cosmic justice Section 3, but also how every flash and rumble was meticulously scanned by anxious mortals for messages from on high. As we explored in Section 5, the sky itself became Zeus's personal messaging service, with lightning bolts as his rather dramatic, non-negotiable text. But as you ponder these celestial communications, a thought might drift into your mind: who's actually on the production line for these divine implements? Who keeps Zeus supplied with his signature brand of high voltage, smite-ready projectiles? For that, you must venture back, metaphorically speaking, to the very beings who forged those first critical bolts during the Titanomachy. The ones we met briefly in Section 1, the Elder Cyclopes, Brontes, the Thunderer, Steropes, the Flasher, and Argus, the Shiner. These are not the later, more brutish, sheep-herding Cyclopes like Polyphemus who gave Odysseus such a headache. No, these three are of a far more ancient and powerful lineage. Sons of Uranus Sky and Gaia Earth, beings who embody the raw, untamed forces of nature and possess an unparalleled mastery of the forge. After Zeus freed them from the abyssal prison of Tartarus, their gratitude and loyalty were boundless, and their primary contribution to the new Olympian order was to keep their liberator well armed. You can imagine Zeus's standing order: keep 'em coming, lads, and maybe make this next batch a little extra zappy. Now, you find yourself peering into their legendary workshop. Forget your neat, orderly human smithies. The forges of the Cyclopes are most often imagined deep within the fiery heart of volcanoes, like Mount Etna in Sicily, or some other, even more primordial, subterranean furnace that taps directly into the Earth's molten core. The heat is almost unbearable, a physical presence that makes the very air ripple. The noise is cataclysmic, a continuous, deafening symphony of roaring bellows. The percussive clang of colossal hammers against equally massive anvils, and the hiss and crackle of elemental energies being tamed and shaped. Showers of incandescent sparks, each one a miniature sun, erupt constantly, briefly illuminating the cyclopean forms of the smiths, their single central eyes glowing with the reflected light of the forge fires. The air is thick with the smell of sulfur, superheated metal, and something else, an almost electric tang, the scent of ozone, of power barely contained. Their workshop probably had a sign: you don't have to be mad to work here, but having only one eye and an immunity to third-degree burns definitely helps. Watch them as they work. Brontes, the Thunderer, might be the one wrestling with the bellows, stoking the flames to an impossible intensity. Steropes, the Flasher, could be drawing down raw, untamed lightning, snatching it from the ether with specially crafted tongs that somehow don't melt in his grasp. And Argus, the Shiner. Perhaps he's the one meticulously hammering the captured energies into their familiar, deadly, yet strangely beautiful forms. The jagged spear of light, the forked bolt, the incandescent starburst. The materials they use aren't just iron or bronze. The myths are poetic here, suggesting they work with the very essence of storms: solidified thunderclaps, crystallized lightning, fragments of fallen stars, all bound together with divine fire and an unyielding will. This isn't mere metalworking, it's an act of cosmic alchemy, channeling and shaping primal forces. Their relationship with Zeus is crucial. They are not just his employees, they are his indispensable allies. the guarantors of his continued supremacy. Without their tireless labor, the thunderbolt that underpins his kingship and enforces his justice would not exist. It's a kind of divine military-industrial complex, albeit one with a very, very small and highly specialized workforce. A significant historical fact is that while the elder Cyclopes were the original forgers of Zeus's bolts, in later Greek myths, the Olympian god Hephaestus, himself the divine smith and patron of craftsmen, also had forges often said to be volcanic and was sometimes depicted as being assisted by Cyclopes in his work, creating a sort of mythological overlap, or a passing of the torch in divine artisanship. But the primordial power in the original gift still firmly belonged to Brontes, Steropes, and Argus. Mythologists continue to explore whether the portrayal of these elder Cyclopes purely as smiths was a later development, perhaps a way to rationalize their original, more chaotic nature as personifications of violent storm phenomena, or if their role as divine artisans, crafters of the ultimate celestial weapon, was integral to their character from the earliest oral traditions. Were they storm demons first, and smiths second, or were they always the master craftsmen of the storm? One quirky and rather charming detail that sometimes emerges about these otherwise fearsome beings is their occasional depiction, not just as laborers, but as having distinct, if gruff, personalities. They weren't mindless automatons. They were capable of loyalty, as shown to Zeus, and presumably, they took immense pride in their craft. Imagine them presenting a particularly well-made batch of Thunderbolts to Zeus. Just finished these, boss. Polished them up real nice. That big one, third from the left, that's got your name written all over it for the next uppity giant. Perhaps they even had their own internal quality control, or argued over the best technique for tempering a lightning flash. These elder Cyclopes, then, are far more than just monstrous giants. They are the indispensable, if often unseen, power behind the throne. The master technicians who provide Zeus with his most iconic attribute, their fiery forges are the wellspring of his most visible power. The place where the raw fury of the cosmos is given form and purpose. Every time Zeus raises his hand and a bolt leaps forth, it's a testament not only to his own might, but to the skill, loyalty, and earth-shattering labor of these one-eyed titans of the forge. They are the quiet well, not so quiet enablers of divine order, one perfectly crafted thunderbolt at a time. You've peered into the fiery, clamorous forges of the elder Cyclopes, those one-eyed master craftsmen, Brontes, Steropes, and Arges, who, as we explored in Section 6, tirelessly supplies Zeus with his arsenal of thunderbolts. You understand that these aren't just any weapons. They are symbols of his supreme authority. Section 2, and potent tools for delivering often dramatic and final justice. Section 3. We've also seen how every flash and rumble could be interpreted as a direct message from the king of the gods, a celestial omen to be carefully deciphered. Section 5. But now, let's lean in a little closer and consider a more nuanced application of this divine firepower. Was every single discharge from Olympus intended as a full-scale smiting? A total obliteration of the unfortunate target? Or could it be that sometimes, just sometimes, Zeus opted for something more akin to a warning shot? Imagine Zeus, perched on his throne on Mount Olympus, observing the myriad follies of gods and mortals below. He sees a king growing a bit too big for his britches, a nymph considering a particularly ill-advised romance, or perhaps a minor deity contemplating some light treason. Does he immediately reach for the biggest, baddest bolt in his arsenal, the one labeled extra crispy? Not always. The myths occasionally hint at a more calibrated response. Perhaps he'd select a thunderbolt that wasn't designed for total annihilation, but to deliver a pointed, unforgettable message. I see you, knock it off. Or the next one won't miss. You might picture a scenario where a thunderbolt strikes near an individual, shattering a nearby tree or blasting a chunk out of a handy rock, close enough to make their hair stand on end and their ears ring for a week. but leaving them otherwise unharmed, apart from perhaps needing a swift change of tunic. That's not an accident. That's a divine, don't push your luck. Monet, or consider a bolt that specifically targets an object symbolic of someone's transgression. Maybe it vaporizes the ill-gotten gains of a corrupt merchant, or shatters the presumptuous altar a mortal built to himself. The message is clear, the property damage regrettable, but the perpetrator gets to walk away, hopefully a little wiser and a lot more humble. It's like Zeus had a dimmer switch on his Thunderbolt level 1 for cut it out. Level 5 for you're now a small pile of ash. This idea of a divine warning shot serves several purposes in the mythological narrative. Firstly, it adds a layer of suspense and psychological drama. The recipient of such a warning knows they're on thin ice. Will they heed the sign? Will they change their ways? Or will they foolishly persist and incur the full measure of Olympian wrath? It gives characters a chance, however slim, to avert their own doom, making the eventual punishment, if it comes, feel more justified within the story's logic. Secondly, it reinforces Zeus's authority without him having to constantly resort to overwhelming force. A well-placed warning can be just as effective as a direct hit in maintaining order, and probably saves on the divine energy bill. It's the ancient equivalent of a strongly worded letter, but, with more explosions and a higher chance of localized ozone generation. A relevant historical fact here is that in ancient Greek diplomatic and military practice, formal warnings, ultimatums, or symbolic displays of force often preceded actual hostilities. Heralds would be sent. Terms would be offered. The gods, in their interactions with mortals and each other, sometimes seem to mirror these human protocols. Zeus, as the ultimate ruler, might not always wish to escalate immediately to the divine equivalent of total war. An epithet sometimes associated with Zeus is kataibates, meaning he who descends, specifically referring to lightning descending from the sky. This implies a deliberate, targeted action, not just a random blast, suggesting he has control over where and how forcefully it strikes. Perfect for delivering a precisely aimed warning. Ancient historians and mythologists alike continue to discuss whether these instances of Zeus issuing warnings via his thunderbolts represent a more sophisticated, merciful, or even patient aspect of his divine justice, perhaps reflecting an evolving understanding of his character, or if they are simply narrative devices employed by the myth-tellers to heighten suspense and moralize before an inevitable, destructive climax. Did Zeus genuinely offer a chance for redemption? Or was he just toying with his victims, like a cat with a particularly doomed mouse? One quirky or fringe tidbit could involve the specific interpretation of warning strikes. Perhaps if a bolt struck from a clear blue sky a Dio Semyon, it was an undeniable and urgent warning directly from Zeus, carrying more weight than lightning from a common thunderstorm. Or maybe there were folk beliefs about the sound of the thunder accompanying a warning bolt, a sharp crack for a warning versus a prolonged rumbling roar for imminent destruction. Imagine ancient seers with little notebooks. Single sharp clap, lightning hit olive tree to the left of Temple King, should probably cancel that ill-advised affair. Check. Prolonged rumble. Fork lightning directly overhead. Everybody run? The reaction to such a divine warning shot would, of course, be critical. The sensible mortal or minor deity would immediately cease whatever activity had incurred Zeus's notice, probably make some hasty and substantial sacrifices, and generally try to lie low for a while. Ignoring a warning bolt from Zeus was akin to hitting the snooze button on a divine alarm clock that you know is rigged with a substantial charge of celestial dynamite. It rarely ended well. So, as you picture Zeus on his Olympian throne, surveying his domain, remember that his hand doesn't always go for the nuclear option. Sometimes, that legendary thunderbolt, so skillfully crafted by his Cyclopean allies, is deployed with a degree of finesse, serving as a stark, electrifying reminder that the King of the Gods is watching, and that his patience, while occasionally considerable, is not infinite. The air crackles not just with power, but with meaning. And sometimes that meaning is a chance to reconsider your life choices. You've now considered the more nuanced side of Zeus's thunderbolt, how it wasn't always about total annihilation as we explored in Section 3, but could sometimes serve as a rather pointed divine warning shot. As we pondered in Section 7, if you were on the receiving end of such a celestial cease and desist, or even if you merely witnessed a particularly awe-inspiring display of Zeus's atmospheric fireworks, you'd naturally be wondering about the proper response. Do you just quickly chalk up an "our bad, won't happen again" on the nearest convenient rock, or were there more formal, structured ways in which lightning, its potent symbolism, and the very ground it touched, became integrated into ancient Greek worship and ritual? Let's delve deeper into this. You might find that the thunderbolt wasn't just a weapon Zeus kept handy. Its image, its very idea, permeated religious life. Picture an ancient sanctuary dedicated to Zeus, perhaps Zeus Keranos, Zeus the Thunderer, or Zeus Katabates, Zeus who descends in lightning. It's not hard to imagine representations of the thunderbolt adorning the temple's friezes, perhaps painted on the walls, or even small, votive thunderbolts made of bronze or clay being left as offerings by worshippers seeking favor or acknowledging the god's power. Priests officiating at such a shrine might have carried staffs or implements that subtly incorporated the zigzag motif of lightning, a visual nod to the chief attribute of their deity. While they weren't about to start flinging actual lightning, these symbols would have served as constant reminders of Zeus's ultimate authority, our old friend from Section 2. And what about those places physically struck by lightning? The Analysia we touched upon earlier when discussing Divine Justice, Section 3, and the interpretation of omens, Section 5. These locations weren't just casually noted and then forgotten. They were often formally set apart. A mainstream historical fact is that when a place was struck by lightning, it was frequently enclosed by a wall or boundary stones, and it became taboo to enter or cultivate that spot. It was considered touched by Zeus, consecrated by his direct fiery intervention. Special rites, known as embata or similar terms, might be performed by priests or designated officials to ritually purify or properly dedicate the spot. This wasn't a place for your average picnic. This was ground zero of a divine event. The ancient equivalent of "do not cross police line," but with much more gravitas and probably fewer donuts. The rituals performed at these struck sites could vary. Sometimes it was about propitiation, an attempt to appease any lingering divine anger or to honor the power that had been displayed. Offerings might be made, libations poured, specific animals sacrificed, though a sacrifice on a spot already sacrificed by Zeus would be a delicate matter. Other times, the site might become a focus for divination, a place where seers felt particularly attuned to Zeus's will, given he'd already made his presence so dramatically known there. Archaeologists and classicists still debate the precise ritual significance of various objects, sometimes found buried or deposited at or near known lightning-struck sites in the ancient world. Were they offering specifically to appease Zeus after a strike? Protective amulets left by fearful locals, or simply everyday debris that coincidentally ended up near a spot later deemed sacred. The thunderbolt, or rather the invocation of Zeus as the wielder of it, also played a crucial role in the swearing of solemn oaths. When individuals or city-states entered into important treaties or made binding vows, they would often call upon Zeus Horkios, Zeus of oaths, to witness their commitment. The unspoken, but universally understood, consequence of breaking such a divinely sanctioned oath was the wrath of Zeus, most likely delivered via personalized lightning dispatch. This made the thunderbolt an invisible but ever-present participant in some of the most critical legal and diplomatic procedures of the ancient Greek world. It was the ultimate cosmic deterrent against perjury. There's also the matter of individuals killed by lightning. These unfortunates weren't typically given ordinary funeral rites. Instead, they were often considered to have been taken or marked by Zeus in a special, albeit fatal way. A widely attested practice, particularly in Roman custom which often mirrored Greek beliefs in these matters, where such individuals were called fulguriti, was that these victims were often buried on the very spot where they were struck, and their graves were regarded as sacred or taboo, not to be disturbed. It was a rather direct and permanent form of divine selection, and not one you'd volunteer for. A quirky or fringe tidbit you might uncover is the belief in some localities about the specific properties of materials from a lightning-struck site. For instance, wood from a tree that had been blasted by Zeus's bolt might be considered to have special powers. Perhaps it was particularly potent for carving sacred images. Or conversely, so imbued with divine energy that it was dangerous to handle or burn for ordinary purposes. Animals killed by lightning. 2. Posed a ritual conundrum: were they a divine sacrifice or an accursed thing? Different communities might have had different protocols. Imagine a shepherd finding a sheep zapped by lightning. Is this dinner? Or do I need to call a priest? And will the priest charge extra for house calls involving singed livestock? So, you see, the Thunderbolts' presence in ancient Greek life wasn't confined to dramatic myths of gods and heroes. Its power, its symbolism, and the awe it inspired wove their way into the very fabric of religious observance, legal customs, and the way people understood their relationship with the divine and the very ground beneath their feet. It was a constant, crackling reminder of the forces that governed their world. You've now explored how the awesome power of Zeus's thunderbolt, and even the very ground it scarred, became woven into the fabric of ancient Greek sacred rituals and oaths, as we delved into in Section 8, from setting apart lightning-struck ground as taboo to invoking the divine bolt as a guarantor of solemn vows. Its presence was deeply felt. We've also seen it used with a degree of calibration, sometimes as a final, devastating judgment. Section 3, and other times as a carefully aimed warning shot. Section 7, this very idea of a calibrated response, a divine power applied with varying intensity, might lead you to a rather sleepy but intriguing question: was every thunderbolt that Zeus hurled from Olympus basically the same model? Or did our master craftsmen, the Cyclopes, those fiery artisans from Section 6, perhaps offer a more diverse product line, a celestial armory with different types of bolts for different occasions? It's a tempting thought. After all, you wouldn't use a sledgehammer to crack a nut, or at least you probably shouldn't if you want to eat the nut. Similarly, would Zeus always reach for his most catastrophically powerful bolt, the one capable of shaking mountains and boiling seas, if a slightly less dramatic, but equally effective option was available? The ancient poets, in their rich and often vivid descriptions of divine hardware, certainly give us some tantalizing clues. They don't just say, Zeus threw a thunderbolt. They often use a variety of evocative adjectives and phrases that hint at different characteristics, different visual and auditory effects, and perhaps, by extension, different intended impacts. You might read of a smoking bolt, keraunos athalois, which conjures an image not just of bright light, but of smoldering impact, perhaps a bolt that burns rather than just blasts. Then there's the flaming bolt, keraunos phlogois, emphasizing its fiery, incandescent nature. You often hear of the forked bolt or two-pronged bolt, a classic image suggesting a more complex, branching discharge, perhaps capable of striking multiple targets or symbolizing a more intricate judgment. Sometimes it's described as bright, arges, like the name of one of its makers, and sometimes as terrible or dreadful. While ancient Greek texts might not provide a neat, itemized catalog of thunderbolt models like you'd find in a divine weapons brochure, now with 20% more smite, the sheer variety in poetic description is suggestive. The Cyclopes were, after all, master smiths who originally gifted Zeus with thunder and the smoky bolt and dazzling lightning, implying from the get-go a certain range. Consider the different functions we've already explored. A bolt intended as a warning shot might not need the same payload of cosmic fury as one designed to subdue a rebellious titan or punish an entire city for egregious hubris. Perhaps a warning bolt was more about the sound and the light, a deafening crack, a blinding flash very close by, but with minimal physical destruction. A punitive bolt, on the other hand, would carry the full weight of Zeus's wrath, designed to obliterate or transform. And what about those rare instances we touched upon in Section 4 where a bolt seemed to shape the land, perhaps creating a spring that would surely be a different order of celestial discharge altogether, imbued with a creative or generative spark rather than a purely destructive one? Maybe the Cyclops had a special landscaping edition for such occasions, complete with optional water feature attachment. A relevant historical fact is that the ancient Etruscans, neighbors to the Romans and heavily influenced by Greek culture and vice versa, had a remarkably complex system of interpreting lightning. They believed in different types of thunderbolts, hurled by different deities from different sectors of the sky, each carrying a specific meaning. While we don't have such a detailed, codified system explicitly laid out for the Greeks in quite the same way, the Etruscan example shows that ancient Mediterranean cultures were certainly capable of conceiving of divine lightning in highly differentiated terms. The Greeks, with their rich poetic vocabulary, words like Keraunos for the thunderbolt itself, Asterope for the flash of lightning, and Bronte for the sound of thunder, had the linguistic tools to imply such distinctions, even if they didn't categorize them like obsessive ancient meteorologists. Classicists still debate whether the varied poetic descriptions of Zeus's thunderbolts in ancient Greek texts reflect a genuine, widespread folk belief in different actual categories of lightning, each with distinct purposes or levels of intensity, or if these variations are primarily literary embellishments, employed by poets for dramatic effect, vivid imagery, or symbolic resonance within a particular narrative context. Was Homer describing what people truly believed were different kinds of divine bolts? Or was he just a master wordsmith painting a more terrifying or awe-inspiring picture? One quirky tidbit that plays into this idea of specialized bolts comes from some later philosophical or allegorical interpretations of myths. You might find thinkers trying to categorize Zeus's actions and, by extension, the tools he used. For example, a Neoplatonist might see one type of bolt as representing divine nous intellect, striking down ignorance, while another, more fiery bolt, might symbolize the purification of the soul. While these are later philosophical overlays, they show a continued fascination with the idea that not all divine interventions, and thus not all thunderbolts, were created equal. Imagine a philosopher trying to explain to a slightly bewildered shepherd, No, that wasn't a punitive bolt that nearly hit your flock. That was clearly a noetic clarifying bolt, intended to awaken you to the forms. You should feel enlightened, not just singed. So, as you picture Zeus on Olympus, it's perhaps more interesting to imagine him not with just one all-purpose thunderbolt, but with a carefully curated collection. Perhaps like a seasoned golfer, he'd consult with Hebe, his cupbearer, or Ganymede. That mortal king is showing signs of advanced hubris. I think the number 3 smiting iron should do the trick today. Not too flashy, but gets the point across. It adds a certain divine connoisseurship to his otherwise rather direct methods of governance. The sky was his canvas, and the thunderbolts, in all their potential variety, were his very versatile, very loud brushes. You've now pondered the intriguing possibility that Zeus, our Olympian kingpin, didn't just have one standard-issue thunderbolt, but perhaps a whole armory of them. A diverse toolkit of divine displeasure and emphasis, skillfully crafted by his Cyclopean allies, as we speculated in Section 9. Whether he was selecting a gentle reminder bolt or the full smite and awe package, these celestial discharges were frequent and impactful. But now, let's drift down from the lofty peaks of Mount Olympus, away from the divine perspective, and try to imagine what it was like for the average mortals on the receiving end, the farmers, the sailors, the city dwellers of ancient Greece. When the skies darkened, the air grew heavy, and Zeus decided to make his presence, or his displeasure, known. You can imagine the scene: a hot, humid afternoon in Attica. The cicadas, usually a deafening chorus, fall eerily silent. The sky, moments before a clear azure blue, begins to bruise with shades of gray and angry purple, A sudden wind whips up the dust, and the hairs on your arms prickle with an unseen energy. There's no advanced weather radar, no calm meteorologist on the evening news explaining cold fronts and pressure systems. There is only the dawning, gut-wrenching realization that Zeus is stirring. This wasn't just a storm is coming, this was the king of the gods. Our recurring theme from Section 2 is about to make a statement. The first distant rumble of thunder, the voice of Brontes, perhaps from those primordial forges Section 1 and 6, would send a shiver down your spine. Then comes the flash. Steropes or Argus at work, a jagged spear of blinding white or an eerie, violet sheet of light that momentarily turns night into day, etching the landscape in stark relief. The ensuing crash of thunder isn't just loud, it feels like the sky itself is being torn apart, like the very mountains are collapsing. For an ancient Greek, this wasn't merely a natural phenomenon. It was a direct, visceral manifestation of divine power, a front-row seat to Zeus's might. And with that power came a profound, almost primal fear. Fear, because you knew that each of those bolts had a purpose. It could be a message, an omen to be deciphered by the seers as we explored in Section 5. It could be an instrument of justice, seeking out some hubristic individual or community that had transgressed a concept from Section 3. Or it could just be Zeus in a particularly bad mood, and you really hoped you weren't in the path of whatever was irking him. There was the immediate physical fear of being struck, of your home being shattered, your precious olive grove blasted, or your livestock decimated. These were not abstract anxieties, they were real possibilities. The ancient equivalent of duck and cover probably involved a lot of desperate prayers and hiding under the sturdiest thing you could find, all while hoping it wasn't an oak tree, which Zeus rather liked and might target for emphasis. But it wasn't just fear. Intermingled with that terror was a deep, undeniable sense of awe, of reverence. This was, after all, the power that had overthrown the Titans, that maintained the order of the cosmos. To witness a thunderstorm was to witness the majesty of the supreme God, a raw, untamed beauty that was both terrifying and sublime. The sheer scale of it, the untrammeled energy, it was a powerful reminder of humanity's smallness and the God's immense, overarching presence. A significant historical fact is that the ancient Greeks, like many pre-industrial societies, lived in very close communion with the natural world, and powerful phenomena like storms, earthquakes, or eclipses were almost universally interpreted as signs of divine activity. Infusing their worldview with a constant awareness of the sacred and the supernatural. During such a storm, you wouldn't just be idly watching from your window. People would engage in ritualistic behaviors. Prayers would be offered, perhaps hasty sacrifices made, to Zeus Keranos the Thunderer, or Zeus Katabates. He who descends, beseeching him to avert his wrath, to spare their homes and lives. Some might have specific household charms or amulets they believed offered protection. Anthropologists and historians of religion continue to analyze the precise balance between genuine, abject terror and formalized cultic reverence in ancient societies' responses to powerful natural events like thunderstorms. Was it more about desperately trying to placate an angry, unpredictable deity? Or was there also an element of scheduled, respectful acknowledgement of an awesome, ruling power? One quirky tidbit from the realm of ancient storm beliefs is the idea found in some cultures and hinted at in Greek folklore that certain actions or materials could either attract or repel lightning. For example, the laurel tree, sacred to Apollo, was sometimes believed to be immune to lightning strikes, making it a supposedly safe place to shelter. Though how many people actually tested that theory during a major electrical storm is debatable. Conversely, other objects or even certain individuals might be seen as lightning magnets. If your neighbor's house got zapped 3 times in a row, you might start giving them some serious side-eye and wondering if they'd forgotten to pay their divine protection money. So, for the ancient mortal, a thunderstorm wasn't just a dramatic weather event to be admired from a safe distance or complained about if it spoiled a picnic. It was an intensely personal, deeply religious experience. It was a moment when the veil between the human and divine worlds grew thin, when the power of Zeus was made undeniably, terrifyingly manifest. The air itself would feel charged, not just with electricity, but with meaning, with divine intent. It was a potent cocktail of fear for one's own safety, awe at the display of cosmic power, and an urgent desire to understand what message, if any, the king of the gods was trying to send. It certainly makes our modern grumbles about a bit of rain seem rather trivial in comparison. You've just survived another of Zeus's spectacular, and frankly rather terrifying, atmospheric performances, the kind we cowered through together in Section 10. The last echoes of thunder have grumbled away into the distance. The oppressive darkness has lifted, and the air, though perhaps still charged with an electric tang and the faint scent of ozone, feels cleaner. You cautiously poke your head out from whatever relatively sturdy, or at least hopefully lightning-proof shelter you found, and then you see it a stark, dramatic alteration in the landscape. Maybe a towering oak tree in the village square is now a splintered, smoking ruin. Perhaps a section of open field is scorched black, with a strange, glassy formation where the bolt met sandy soil, or a prominent rock on the nearby hillside has been cleft in two. This isn't just storm damage. In the ancient Greek worldview, this is ground zero, a place directly and undeniably touched by the king of the gods, and such a place would never be seen as ordinary again. Remember how we briefly touched on these lightning-struck spots back in Section 3 when discussing divine justice, and again in Section 8 concerning rituals? These locations, sometimes called an Enolision or a Hieron Coronion, a shrine of the Thunderbolt, weren't just cleaned up and forgotten. They became sacred earth, set apart, imbued with a potent mix of awe, fear, and divine significance. You find yourself drawn to observe, from a safe distance at first, what happens next. The first thing you'd notice is an immediate sense of gravity surrounding the spot. Witnesses would speak in hushed tones. There's no rushing in to see if anything can be salvaged, no casual inspection. Instead, there's a recognition that something profound has occurred, a direct intervention from Olympus. Soon, priests or local religious officials might arrive to inspect the site. Their task would be to formally consecrate it, to mark it as belonging to Zeus. This often involved enclosing the area, perhaps with a low wall of stones, or setting up boundary markers, an act that declared this patch of ground abaton, meaning untrodden, forbidden to ordinary mortal use. You couldn't till it, you couldn't build on it, you certainly couldn't use it as a casual shortcut. It was now, in a very real sense, Zeus's property, a permanent scar on the earth testifying to his power. It's like Zeus's version of celestial graffiti tagging, but with significantly more explosive power and a much higher chance of the tag becoming a revered monument. A significant historical fact is that this practice of ritually isolating lightning-struck places was not unique to the Greeks. The Romans had similar customs, referring to such spots as bidental if a two-toothed sheep was sacrificed there as part of the consecration, or podal if it was enclosed like a wellhead. This widespread Mediterranean tradition underscores a common ancient belief when lightning strikes. A god has directly interacted with the earth, and that point of contact becomes numinous, charged with supernatural power. The rituals performed at an Elysion would be specific and solemn. There might be purification rites to handle the intense divine energy that had been unleashed. Offerings would likely be made, libations of wine or honey poured onto the scorched earth. Perhaps specific prayers recited to Zeus in his capacity as he who descends in lightning. Zeus Kataibates. It wasn't necessarily a place for joyful worship or festive gatherings. The mood would be one of profound respect, awe, and perhaps a lingering tremor of fear. It was a memorial to an event that demonstrated the god's unpredictable and overwhelming might. Archaeologists continue to debate the exact nature of the cult. If any, at many identified or suspected Enolasia, were they active centers of ongoing worship and regular propitiation, or primarily sites of ritualized avoidance and the symbolic demarcation of divine power? sort of permanent sacred exclusion zone. If a person was unfortunate enough to be killed by lightning, a rather direct form of divine summons, their fate was also distinct. As we touched upon before, they were often not given typical funeral rites but were buried on the very spot they fell. This grave then became, in itself, an Elysian, a sacred and inviolable place. It was believed that such individuals had been taken by Zeus, and to disturb their remains or their final resting place would be a grave sacrilege. So, not only did the land become sacred, but the victim, in a grim way, also became part of that sacred, set-apart status. Probably not much comfort to the dearly departed, but it added another layer to the site's profound significance. One quirky or fringe tidbit you might encounter in relation to these sites involves the materials found or left there. What happened to the splinters of that blasted oak tree, or the vitrified sand fulgurites from the strike point, were these considered potent relics? Perhaps imbued with some of Zeus's power, to be carefully collected by priests for use in other rituals, or were they deemed too dangerous, too supernaturally hot to handle, and left strictly alone within the enclosure? You can imagine folk beliefs springing up. Perhaps a splinter from a lightning-struck olive tree could ward off lesser evils. Or maybe possession of such an item would just make you a more attractive target for future celestial target practice. Oh, you're collecting Zeus-zapped souvenirs? Bold move, cotton. Let's see how that plays out. So, you observe as this small patch of your world is transformed. Yesterday, it was just a field, a tree, a hillside. Today, it is something other. It's a testament, a warning, a point of direct contact with the divine, a place where the veil thinned and the raw power of Olympus touched the earth. The Thunderbolt, in these instances, does more than just punish or warn. It fundamentally alters the character of the land, writing a new sacred chapter into its story, a chapter to be read with reverence and a healthy dose of caution by all who pass by. You've just walked with me, in your mind's eye, through a patch of ancient Greek earth that has been touched by celestial fire, a place set apart and made sacred by a direct hit from Zeus's thunderbolt, as we explored in section 11. That ground, that Elysian, becomes uniquely Zeus's, a testament to his power. This brings up a rather interesting point as you drift deeper into this sleepy exploration if the place struck becomes so exclusively marked. What about the Thunderbolt itself? We know the Elder Cyclopes, Brontes, Steropes, and Arges forged this ultimate weapon specifically for him during the Titanomachy, gifting him the power that would secure his reign as we saw in sections 1 and 6. We know it became his undeniable symbol of kingship section 2 and his go-to instrument for enforcing divine law, often with rather smoky results. Section 3. But was this power ever shared? Could another god borrow the Thunderbolt for a particularly tough smiting job, or perhaps just to impress a mortal on a weekend? The overwhelming answer you'll find as you sift through the myths is a resounding nope. The Thunderbolt, in its true potent form, remained almost exclusively, jealously, Zeus's, and there are some very good reasons for this, both practical from a storytelling perspective and deeply symbolic. Think about it. If just anyone could get their hands on a weapon of that magnitude, the carefully constructed, if occasionally chaotic, Olympian order would probably unravel pretty quickly. Imagine Hera, in one of her frequent states of irritation with Zeus's extracurricular activities, having her own private stash of lightning. Or Ares, the god of war, deciding to spice up a minor skirmish with a few well-aimed celestial blasts. The cosmic insurance premiums would be astronomical. The unique origin of the Thunderbolt is a key factor. It wasn't a common artifact that could be replicated or mass-produced, even by divine standards. It was a specific gift, born of a specific alliance at a critical juncture in cosmic history. The Cyclopes made it for Zeus, their liberator. This gives him a singular claim, a kind of divine patent on the technology. You don't just lend out the weapon that won you the universe. It's bad for the brand. More importantly, the Thunderbolt's exclusivity is fundamental to Zeus's supreme authority. It is the ultimate trump card, the one piece of divine hardware that no one else possesses, and therefore no one can truly match his power when he chooses to wield it. If other gods had access to similar weaponry, Zeus's position as king would be significantly diluted, constantly open to challenge by any deity who managed to get their hands on a Bolt Begone 3000. His unique possession of it underscores his preeminence. It's what makes him the sky god, the wielder of celestial fire. Not just a sky god with some fancy pyrotechnics. The Cyclopes probably had a very strict Zeus-only policy on their Thunderbolt maintenance and upgrade requests. Sorry, Apollo, no lightning arrows for you. Standard sunbeams only. Next. Of course, other gods had their own impressive attributes and symbols of power. Poseidon had his trident, capable of shaking the earth and stirring the seas. Hades had his helm of invisibility, making him a master of the unseen. Apollo had his far-shooting silver bow. Athena her wisdom, spear, and aegis. A significant historical fact is that while this divine division of attributes and powers created a pantheon with diverse capabilities, the Thunderbolt remained iconographically and mythologically unparalleled in its representation of ultimate skyborn authority, cementing Zeus's position at the apex of the divine hierarchy. These other powers were mighty, but they didn't carry the same universe-ordering, king-making weight as Zeus's lightning. Were there ever any exceptions? Any myths where someone else got to hold the lightning? Even for a moment, they are incredibly rare, if they exist at all in any meaningful way, and would likely be fraught with peril or serve to emphasize Zeus's ultimate control. Mortals who tried to imitate the Thunderbolt, like Salmoneus, were, as we've seen, promptly and fatally reminded of copyright infringement. Divine Edition, perhaps a very trusted ally, like Athena, might in some specific artistic representations seem to be associated with lightning-like power through the Aegis, but this is usually seen as an extension or reflection of Zeus's own power, which he might lend in part, rather than a transfer of the Thunderbolt itself. She doesn't get to throw it. Myth scholars continue to discuss the degree to which the exclusive wielding of the Thunderbolt by Zeus reflects an earlier, more monarchical phase of Indo-European sky god worship, where the chief deity often held singular command over atmospheric phenomena, as opposed to being a specifically Greek theological development aimed at structuring and centralizing divine authority within their particular Olympian pantheon. Was Zeus simply inheriting an ancient king of the storm trope? Or was his exclusive Thunderbolt a more deliberate Greek narrative choice to solidify his power structure? One quirky tidbit that underscores this exclusivity is the sheer terror even other gods sometimes display when Zeus is truly enraged and brandishing his bolts. It's not just mortals who tremble. In some accounts of divine squabbles, the other Olympians quickly back down when Zeus starts reaching for his lightning. It's the divine equivalent of everyone suddenly finding their shoes fascinating when the boss is truly furious. This highlights that even among the immortals, the Thunderbolt commanded a unique level of fearful respect, a power that was his alone to unleash. If another god accidentally stumbled upon one of Zeus's spare bolts lying around, unlikely, as he probably kept them under lock and key, or perhaps under his pillow, they'd probably treat it like an unexploded bomb, or a very angry, very sparkly badger. So as you drift further, you can appreciate that this exclusivity wasn't just a casual detail. It was a cornerstone of the entire Olympian power structure, a constant, visible, and audible reminder that while many gods held power, only one held the power, the ultimate symbol of dominion over the cosmos. The Thunderbolt was Zeus's, and in that ownership lay the heart of his reign. You've now come to understand that Zeus's Thunderbolt wasn't some divine free-for-all weapon, passed around Olympus like a party favor. Oh no. As we firmly established in Section 12, it was his exclusive, top tier, Don't even think about touching its symbol of ultimate power and cosmic management. It was forged for him by the very best in the subterranean fire-belching business. The Elder Cyclopes are friends from sections 1 and 6, and it unequivocally represented his absolute authority as king of the gods, a core theme since section 2. But now, as you drift in that calm space between wakefulness and sleep, you might start to wonder, how did the ancient Greeks actually visualize this terrifying, yet utterly crucial, piece of divine hardware when they weren't, actively ducking and covering from a real celestial light show? How did they capture the essence of a lightning strike in a static image? You gaze now, in your mind's eye, at the vast gallery of ancient Greek art, from humble terracotta vases to monumental marble sculptures, from tiny engraved gems to the gleaming surfaces of coins. Artists across centuries and regions took on the challenge of depicting Zeus in his most formidable attribute. And what you see is a fascinating evolution of a symbol, a visual language developing to convey immense power, divine authority, and sometimes just a hint of impending doom. One of the most common ways you'll see the thunderbolt depicted is as a stylized, often symmetrical, object. It's not usually a photorealistic snapshot of a jagged lightning fork, though it certainly evokes that. Frequently, it appears as a kind of double-ended or multi-pronged shaft, sometimes with flame-like or spiral embellishments at each end, giving it a sense of contained energy, a weaponized bundle of celestial fire. Think of it as less a wild, unpredictable flash and more a precisely crafted, almost aerodynamic implement, ready to be aimed and hurled. Sometimes it's slender and spear-like, other times more robust and club-like. The artist needed a tangible shorthand, something that instantly said Zeus and power, and this stylized bolt became just that. It was his divine logo, instantly recognizable across the Greek world. On black figure and later red figure vases, which are like wonderful earthy comic books of mythology, you'll often see Zeus in action. He might be depicted in the midst of the Gigantomachy, the epic battle against the monstrous giants, his thunderbolt raised high, about to deliver a decisive blow. Or you might see him enthroned, calm but authoritative, the thunderbolt held in his hand like the scepter it also symbolized, a clear indicator of his royal status. Sometimes, if he's particularly annoyed with a mortal, as we saw was quite possible in section 3, the vase painter will capture him mid-hurl, the bolt a streak of energy aimed at some unfortunate, soon-to-be crispy individual. The dynamism that artists could achieve, even within the strict conventions of vase painting, is quite remarkable. In sculpture, the creating the thunderbolt presented different challenges. Marble and bronze don't easily convey the ephemeral nature of light and energy. So, sculptors often rendered it as a solid, often quite ornate object. The famous, though now lost, colossal gold and ivory statue of Zeus at Olympia, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, crafted by Phidias, depicted the god enthroned, holding a scepter in one hand and a figure of Nike victory in the other. But his ever-present thunderbolt was likely also represented, perhaps at his feet or incorporated into the throne's decoration, a constant reminder of his power? Surviving smaller statues and reliefs certainly show him grasping it firmly. A significant historical fact is that the thunderbolt, or Kourounos in Greek, is arguably the most consistent and immediately identifiable attribute of Zeus in all forms of ancient Greek art. From the early archaic period right through the Hellenistic era, instantly distinguishing him from other deities. Art historians and archaeologists continue to analyze whether the subtle variations in the depiction of Zeus's thunderbolt across different city-states, regions, and changing time periods reflect distinct local cult practices and beliefs about Zeus. Evolving theological ideas about his power, or if they are primarily attributable to the prevailing artistic styles and the individual creative choices of artists and their workshops. Was a slightly curlier thunderbolt in Corinth the sign of a different understanding of Zeus than a straighter one from Athens? Or was it just how the local artists like to draw lightning? A quirky tidbit you might find if you look at some very early Archaic Greek art is that the thunderbolt can sometimes appear almost like a decorative bundle, or even a somewhat abstract floral or spiral design, before it solidifies into its more familiar, weaponized forms. Some very stylized depictions on early vases almost give the ends of the bolt little faces or eye-like volutes, as if the bolt itself were a semi-sentient entity. It's a fascinating glimpse into the visual experimentation that occurred as artists tried to give concrete form to an abstract and terrifying power. Perhaps the early concept art for the Thunderbolt, if the Cyclops had a suggestion box, included some truly wild ideas. What if it's shaped like an angry cloud or perhaps a slightly singed eagle? The Thunderbolt wasn't just for grand statues and epic vase paintings either. You'd find it on coins, a tiny but potent symbol of the issuing city's patron deity or its allegiance to a ruler who identified with Zeus's power. Engraved gems, used as seals or jewelry, often featured Zeus with his bolt, or sometimes just the bolt alone, a compact emblem of divine authority and protection or threat. Depending on your perspective, it was Zeus's ultimate accessory, really. Never left Olympus without it. It just tied the whole king of the cosmos and arbiter of justice ensemble together perfectly. So, as you drift and drowse, picture these ancient artists, painstakingly etching into clay, chiseling into marble, hammering into bronze, trying to capture the uncapturable, the raw, the incandescent power of the sky god, all condensed into a single potent symbol. Their efforts have left us a rich visual legacy, a testament to the enduring symbolic weight of Zeus's thunderbolt, an image that still crackles with ancient power. You've now gazed upon the many ways ancient Greek artists tried to capture the visual essence of Zeus's thunderbolt, that exclusive and formidable symbol of his power, Section 12, which we saw depicted in art forms ranging from grand sculptures to humble coins in Section 13. For centuries, these images reinforce the literal understanding of the thunderbolt as a divine weapon, an emblem of kingship, Section 2, an instrument of justice, Section 3, and a sender of rather dramatic omens, Section 5. But as Greek civilization matured, as cities flourished and new ways of thinking began to take root, a different group of people started to ponder the nature of the gods, the cosmos, and yes, even Zeus's fiery calling card. You contemplate now how these early philosophers began to interpret the divine fire in often more abstract, metaphorical, or even naturalistic terms. This wasn't an overnight shift. Of course, the traditional myths, with their vivid anthropomorphic gods and their very direct interventions in the world, held powerful sway. But alongside the temple rituals and the poetic recitations, a spirit of rational inquiry was awakening. Thinkers like Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes in Ionia began to seek natural explanations for phenomena previously attributed solely to the gods. Later, in Athens and other centers of learning, philosophers like Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and the founders of schools like Stoicism and Epicureanism all grappled with the legacy of myth in different ways. They weren't necessarily all trying to debunk the gods, but many sought to understand them and their attributes on a deeper, often more ethical or intellectual level. So, what happens to Zeus's thunderbolt when it falls under the scrutiny of a philosopher's gaze? Well, for some, it ceased to be merely a physical weapon. However divinely forged by the Cyclops, it began to transform into a symbol. Plato, for instance, while he often used mythological language and imagery, was also critical of the poet's sometimes unflattering portrayals of the gods. A mainstream historical fact is that Plato, in works like the Republic, argued for a more purified, ethically sound conception of the divine. In such a framework, a crude instrument of punishment like a literal thunderbolt might be reinterpreted. Perhaps, for a Platonist, the thunderbolt could symbolize the piercing light of divine reason or intellect nous, cutting through the darkness of ignorance, or the irresistible power of truth that shatters falsehood. It's less about a physical blast and more about a moment of profound, sometimes shocking, enlightenment. The Stoic philosophers, who saw the cosmos as governed by a divine logos, or rational principle, often identified Zeus with this very logos. For them, the traditional myths were allegories. Zeus's thunderbolt, in this light, might not be a capricious tool of anger, but a manifestation of natural law, a necessary force that maintains cosmic balance and order, even if its workings seem harsh or inexplicable from a limited human perspective. It becomes less about Zeus having a bad day and more about the universe's operating system, running a particularly emphatic diagnostic. No, that wasn't Zeus being angry. A Stoic might calmly explain as you pick splinters out of your hair. That was merely the logos reasserting the appropriate tension between elements. Feel the harmony. Then you have the Epicureans, who took a rather different tack. A core tenet of Epicurean philosophy was to free humanity from the fear of capricious gods and the terror of death. They taught that while gods might exist, they lived in a state of perfect tranquility, utterly unconcerned with human affairs. Therefore, meteorological phenomena like thunder and lightning were, for the Epicureans, entirely natural events, caused by the collision of atoms or specific atmospheric processes, not hurled by an angry Zeus. Their aim was ataraxia, or peace of mind. And a major step towards that was understanding that you didn't need to live in constant dread of divine retribution raining down from the sky. You can imagine an Epicurean calmly enjoying a picnic during a thunderstorm, much to the horror of his more traditionally minded companions. "Relax, friends," he might say. "It's merely a conflagration of suitably shaped wind atoms." More wine. Scholars of ancient philosophy still grapple with the extent to which these philosophical reinterpretations or naturalistic explanations of divine attributes, like Zeus's thunderbolt, actually permeated popular belief and religious practice, or if such ideas remained largely confined to relatively small intellectual circles in cities like Athens or Alexandria. Did the average farmer or sailor really stop fearing Zeus's wrath because a philosopher in a faraway academy had a new theory about atoms? Probably not immediately. But these ideas did begin to circulate and influence a broader cultural understanding over time. One quirky tidbit comes from the efforts of some early rationalists to demythologize specific stories. For example, the mythographer Palaephatus, writing perhaps in the 4th century BCE, sought to explain away incredible myths with plausible, if sometimes equally imaginative, rationalizations. While he might not have tackled the thunderbolt directly as a natural phenomenon in the same way as the atomists, the spirit of his work was to strip away the supernatural. You could imagine a similar thinker trying to explain Zeus's famous smitings as perhaps exaggerated accounts of people being struck by ordinary lightning, which was then attributed to divine anger for moralistic purposes. Salmoneus probably just had a faulty chariot with a lot of metal bits during a storm. Bad luck, not bad theology. So, as you drift towards sleep, you can see the image of Zeus's thunderbolt becoming more complex, more layered. It's still there in the popular imagination as the fearsome weapon of the sky god. The symbol of his power still very much alive in art and story. But now, in the quiet groves of academia and the bustling agora, new interpretations are being whispered. The divine fire is being passed through the filter of reason, emerging as a metaphor for justice, for truth, for natural law, or even, for some, as nothing more than a particularly impressive but entirely natural spark. The thunderbolt, it turns out, could ignite thought as well as terror. And so, you find yourself at the end of our rather winding, sleepy exploration of Zeus's thunderbolt, having journeyed from its fiery forging in the depths of primordial chaos. Section 1 to its contemplation by the keen, often critical minds of ancient philosophers. Section 14. We've seen it depicted in ancient art as a tangible symbol of power. Section 13, and understood that this power was almost exclusively Zeus's to wield, a divine prerogative that set him apart. Section 12. We've felt the awe and terror it inspired in mortals. Section 10, and witnessed how the very earth it struck could become consecrated ground, a place forever marked by divine intervention. Section 11. It has been quite the odyssey for a single, albeit very famous, piece of celestial hardware. As you reflect on all these facets, it becomes wonderfully, sleepily clear that Zeus's thunderbolt was, and indeed remains, so much more than just a simple weapon. So much more than a divine zapper for inconvenient heroes or overly ambitious titans. Its legacy is woven from a multitude of threads, each one adding to its complex symbolic weight. It began, as we saw, as a tool of war, gifted by the Cyclops Section 6, enabling Zeus to establish his reign and bring a new order to the cosmos. In this, it was the ultimate symbol of his kingship, his royal scepter. Section 2. But it quickly evolved beyond that. It became the instrument of divine justice, the enforcer of cosmic law and the punisher of hubris. Section 3. It was the means by which Zeus could send stark warnings to those straying from the path. Section 7. And its flashes in the sky were read as potent omens, direct communications from the divine realm. Section 5. We even glimpsed its rarer, more mysterious capacity to shape the very land, perhaps coaxing forth sacred springs. Section 4. And wondered if the Cyclopean arsenal contained different types of bolts for such varied and specific effects. Section 9. Its presence, or even the invocation of its power, was integral to sacred rituals and the swearing of unbreakable oaths. Section 8. This journey through its many roles reveals the thunderbolt as a multifaceted emblem, a compact symbol that encapsulated a whole worldview. It represented not just destructive force, but also the power to create order, to communicate divine will, to sanctify, to warn, and to uphold the foundational laws of the universe. It was the ultimate expression of Zeus's authority. Yes, but also of the intricate and often terrifying relationship between mortals and the divine. The ancient Greeks didn't just see a lightning strike. They saw a story, a judgment, a message, a manifestation of the sacred. So, after all this, if someone tries to tell you a thunderbolt is just a really big spark, you can now gently, sleepily, correct them with a rather extensive lecture on its nuanced mythological significance. They'll probably be asleep before you get to the part about the Etruscan lightning classifications. The power of this symbol didn't just fade away with the decline of Olympian worship. A significant historical fact is that the iconography of Zeus, or his Roman counterpart, Jupiter and his thunderbolt, was readily adopted and adapted by subsequent cultures, most notably the Roman Empire. Jupiter's fulmen became a potent emblem of Roman imperial power, carried by emperors and legions, symbolizing their own divinely sanctioned authority and swift justice. And even beyond Rome, the image of the thunderbolt has persisted in heraldry, in military insignia, and in art, often continuing to signify supreme power, sudden force, electricity, or divine retribution. Cultural historians continue to trace the complex evolution of the thunderbolt symbol from its ancient religious origins in sky god worship through its classical mythological elaborations to its varied secular and symbolic uses in later Western and even global cultures. Debating the continuity of its core meanings versus the fresh interpretations layered upon it in new contexts, it's a symbol that has shown remarkable resilience and adaptability. One quirky, perhaps unexpected, modern legacy of this ancient symbol is its frequent appearance in company logos, particularly for things related to electricity, power, or speed, from energy companies to sports teams to software. It's a long way from Mount Olympus to a battery advertisement, but that fundamental association with potent, instant energy still resonates. Who knew Zeus was such a branding pioneer? His thunderbolt started as a titan-thumping superweapon, evolved into a profound symbol of cosmic order, and eventually found a comfortable retirement as a pretty effective way to sell you things that go fast or give you a jolt. So, the thunderbolt, you see, one is far more than a simple entry in a mythological bestiary of weapons. It's a key that unlocks a deeper understanding of Zeus himself, not just as a wrathful sky god, but as a complex figure embodying kingship, justice, and the very order of the Greek cosmos. It's a symbol that crackles with layers of meaning, accumulated over centuries of storytelling, worship, artistic representation, and philosophical contemplation. It is, in its own boring and multifaceted way, a bolt from the blue that continues to illuminate our understanding of the ancient world. And as our exploration of this potent symbol now gently concludes, as the last imagined echoes of Olympian thunder fade into a peaceful quiet, allow your mind to drift. The image of the crackling thunderbolt, once so vivid, can now soften, its fierce light dimming into a gentle, comforting glow. The great, sometimes stormy, dramas of the ancient gods and goddesses, their epic struggles and their pronouncements from on high, can recede, leaving behind only a sense of calm and the soft murmur of stories told. You are far from the slopes of Mount Olympus now, far from any fear of celestial displeasure or the need to interpret cryptic omens in the sky. You are in your own safe space, a haven of tranquility where the only flashes of light are those you might imagine behind your eyelids as you drift deeper into rest. The weight of ancient myths, the complexities of divine justice and primordial power, can all be laid aside. Let your thoughts become as soft and yielding as the clouds themselves, no longer charged with energy, but simply floating, peaceful and serene. The journey through this ancient, symbolic landscape is complete. All that remains is to allow the quiet of this moment to envelop you, to carry you effortlessly into a sound, restorative, and deeply sweet sleep.